Ronnie, I know you've been doing a lot of digging on news that had come out, a report that had come out a couple weeks ago about Israel's covert bases in Iraq. So let's start out and hear that.
Yeah, I know it's pretty wild. This story, I don't think got the attention it deserved, probably because it was Israel and the US behind it,
Right.
but also because of the fact that I think there's just so much other, insanity taking place right now that is hard to wrap your mind around, but we shouldn't let it get buried. So the story was revealed a few weeks ago. It's about secret Israeli bases in Iraq, and it's I think one of the most outrageous stories to emerge from this entire regional war. And I think also the fact that it's not getting the attention it deserves tells you everything about how normalized this kind of Israeli and American lawlessness and deception has become. So what happened is there was this shepherd in the Iraqi desert who, back in March, accidentally discovered a secret Israeli military base that was operating inside Iraq in the western Iraqi desert. Um, Again, this is a secret Israeli base, and what's crazy? I mean, Israel and Iraq, they don't have formal relations, right? And the Iraqi population is very hostile to the Israelis because they support Palestine. Like much of the region, by the way, much of the region is very hostile to the settler colonial state that's constantly saying death to Arabs. Um, and again, this is also in a place where, not to say it would be okay if it was like in Syria or Lebanon, but those are places where the Israelis are constantly bombing. There have
Right.
been a few Israeli bombings, I think, inside of Iraq, but it's not
Mhm.
common. So to have, a country like Israel that's technically considered an enemy state to be operating not one, but actually two covert bases is insane. And the story just gets crazier the more details that come out about it, because this wasn't like a temporary operation. Israel had apparently spent over a year preparing this covert military infrastructure on Iraqi soil to support a future operation against Iran. According to the New York Times, and I think also the Wall Street Journal, this had been something that was started by the Israelis in 2024, and officially became operational in 2025 ahead of the 12-day war last year. Um, they had helicopters, right? This wasn't just like two cars hiding in the desert. They had helicopters, they had landing strips, they had commandos and tents and medical support and
Mhm.
refueling operations. So this was an entire clandestine military outpost, again, hidden in Iraq's western desert without the permission or even the knowledge of the Iraqi state. And Iraqi officials later confirmed that there was actually also a second Israeli Israel, again, secretly operating military bases inside another sovereign country without that country's public knowledge or its consent, which is an act of aggression and a
Mhm.
violation of sovereignty. And frankly, if any other country had done this, if Iran, let's say, because we always hear about Iran is violating the sovereignty of every state in the world, apparently. If Iran This would be like Iran having secret military bases inside like Mexico or Canada to prepare attacks for the US.
Mhm.
That which is insane, right? Like American media would be screaming at the top of their lungs that this is an act of war if that was the case. But because it's Israel, the reaction is just kind of like, oh, like this is an interesting and wild security development. Let's move on. Um, and then the story gets darker, by the way. That's not even where it ends. The reason this operation was exposed at all is again because this Iraqi shepherd, 29-year-old guy named Awad al Shamari, accidentally stumbled across this base while he was driving through the desert to buy groceries. So this guy's on a grocery run in the Iraqi desert because he's part of a Bedouin community. Leaves to go buy groceries, accidentally stumbles upon this international covert military operation, and then according to
Mhm.
witnesses and Iraqi officials, he contacts the Iraqi military authorities to report what he'd seen. Right, soldiers, helicopters, tents, military activity around a landing strip, super suspicious stuff. And then you know what happens afterwards, Zoe? He's hunted down by an Israeli helicopter and murdered. This helicopter chases his pickup truck across the desert, repeatedly fires on him until his vehicle is destroyed. And then later, his burned body is found beside the charred remains of his truck. And again, zero outrage. They murdered a guy, just like the shepherd, on his land because he reported their covert military base to the Iraqi authorities. This is a civilian shepherd killed for discovering a secret foreign military installation inside his country. Right? It's just wild. So again, I just want to say, like, I know I'm not trying to like sound like a broken record, but I just feel like the only way for people to understand how outrageous this is if we make like comparisons. So like imagine if Russia had done this or
Mm-hmm.
China had done this somewhere, or again, if Iran had done this, we would never hear the end of it. But I bet most people kind of either maybe saw a headline about this or didn't even know it happened. So this is what I think, again, it got dark, gets a little bit crazier because the scandal doesn't end there because it's not just Israel, it's the US. According to Iraqi officials and former American officials that are quoted in these Western media reports, they are like, there's no way that the Pentagon or CENTCOM didn't know these Israeli bases existed. Absolutely no chance. The US military, of course, we know has massive infrastructure across Iraq. Iraqi airspace is heavily monitored. American Israeli militaries coordinate closely on everything in the region. Like, there's no way the Americans didn't know this. And a former American military commanders literally said it would be, they used the word inconceivable for Washington not to know, which means one of two things happened here. Either the U.S. deliberately concealed the Israeli operations from Iraq, which I believe to be the case, or, and both of these might be true, or some people in Iraq's leadership knew and helped cover it up or just stayed silent about it, which is essentially the same thing. Like, both possibilities could be true, but definitely the American one for sure is true. And remember, Iraq's supposed to be a sovereign state, right? But I think this story also exposes that Iraq remains trapped under these overlapping systems of like American domination and Israeli military penetration. And actually, Zoe, it's even crazier because the Iraqi military even asked their American counterparts for information about this suspicious military activity that was seen in the desert, and they got no answer. And at some point, the Americans had like convinced the Iraqis to basically turn off their own radar systems, saying it was like for their own protection. So, anyways, the other thing I want to mention is that this is also like there's also this constant situation with Iraq where the Americans are constantly complaining about Iranian infiltration in Iraq and Iranian violations of Iraqi sovereignty. Yet again, they're involved in this and of course not a peep about it. And again, I want to go back to the fact, like, I think it's crazy that the US literally compelled Iraq to shut down its own radar systems to protect American aircraft. But now they're saying, oh, this was probably so that they wouldn't notice the Israeli activity, the Israeli covert bases taking place. So I really wanted to tell that story because it exposes how much international law doesn't matter, how much the U.S. just violates sovereignty with total impunity, and then complains about, Iran violating sovereignty. It's just pure projection. And, it exposes a devastating reality that countries like Iraq are still living under the aftershocks of invasion and occupation decades after the fact. This is not a free and sovereign country. If they can't even, like if their people literally get hunted down and killed for discovering a foreign country operating a covert base.
No, I mean, it's ridiculous. And it can kind of, I feel like people, it doesn't necessarily register always. But Rania, you've actually reported from on the ground in Iraq. I don't know if our viewers know that, but you've actually seen the conditions there. What it means to live after, 2 decades of a U.S. invasion and military occupation. It's not when people talk about the U.S. starting wars in other countries, I mean, the reality of Iraq is the aftermath of that.
No, absolutely. And like, anyways, it's also just insane because like being in Lebanon most of the year, 'cause where I live right now, I happen to not be there. You literally constantly, it's constant from the Americans, this idea of like the sovereignty of other countries, the sovereignty of the region from Iran. And then everything is just completely hypocritical and outrageous. And I think that this story really demonstrates that. And yes, having been in Iraq, it's like the country, it's you don't heal or come out of an invasion and occupation that killed like over 1 million people, even over 20 years later. Like they're still dealing with the aftermath of that, and the Americans are still interfering in the country. And even just during this recent war with Iran, they were constantly bombing Iraq and
Right.
bombing the PMF, the Popular Mobilization Forces that helped fight ISIS, saying they're connected to Iran. So just still trying to like overthrow the Iraqi security apparatus after they've
Right.
already thrown the Iraqi security apparatus. It's just never ending aggression and imperialism.